In San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, a look into Facebook's future. Will investors get on board with Zuckerberg's bet, or is it a gamble on videos and stories? Plus, a hotly debated ballot issue here in San Francisco. Funding for the homeless has the tech community and the city divided. We will speak with one of the most outspoken advocates for a new ballot measure, Salesforce co-CEO Mark Benioff. And Apple's hardware overhaul right before its earnings report. Could the revamped iPads and MacBooks be the answer to Apple's future success? Or are their product launches losing their luster? First to our top story, Facebook reported third quarter results Tuesday, and one thing was made clear. CEO Mark Zuckerberg is betting on the company's future, and that is video and disappearing stories, not Facebook's famous news feed. While investors are buying into the vision now, who's to say Facebook videos will catch up to YouTube and that Facebook stories will succeed the way Instagrams have? So far, both features are lagging behind. Zuckerberg made note of that. In a rare moment, the CEO brought up the social media giant's competitors by name-dropping YouTube and even brought up Apple's iMessage as a rival for Facebook Messenger.
Our biggest competitor by far is iMessage. And in important countries like the US, where the iPhone is strong, Apple bundles iMessage as a default texting app and is still ahead. In countries where there's more competition between iOS and Android, like much of Europe, people tend to prefer our services.
Joining us now to talk about the future of Facebook, we have BTIG analyst Richard Greenfield, who currently has a buy rating on the company. Also with us, Bloomberg Tech Sarah Friar, who covers Facebook for us. Of course, Rich, I want to start with you. What do you make of Mark Zuckerberg squarely putting the target on Apple here, as Tim Cook has hit back at Facebook about how it handles data, how it handles privacy?
Look, I think it's less about this war between Apple and Facebook, or, you're looking at kind of the YouTube versus Facebook. The reality is Facebook is one of the dominant companies in terms of mobile time spent. The reality is, despite all of this fear that people were abandoning Facebook or not using its applications, the reality is there's 1.5 billion people using Facebook every single day. Facebook, not all the other applications, but Facebook itself. There's 800 million people using Marketplace. I mean, to me, I have never used the Marketplace tab. I don't know anyone who uses the Marketplace tab. They're saying there's 800 million people using that Marketplace tab to transact, to cars. They actually highlighted cars as becoming a place of real transfer where people are buying and selling cars. There's just so many things that Facebook is doing that are not always obvious to someone in the U.S. And I think there are places in the world like Indonesia where the Facebook Marketplace is the default way in which goods are bought and sold. And so there are really some big differences globally. And I think you mentioned one of them, like looking at iMessage versus Facebook Messenger overseas. Not all of that is apparent to a U.S. investor. And I think the reality is, as you look out more broadly over the next few years, Facebook's got a lot of different initiatives that are at very early stages of monetization. I mean, they're just scratching the surface of Messenger and WhatsApp. Facebook Watch, which you mentioned, or IGTV, which is the Instagram video platform. Very, very early stages. But what you do see is tremendous engagement across the Facebook apps, the family of apps, I should say, and that creates a big long-term opportunity. I think that's what the street is excited about, is that they're just beginning to give hints of monetization for all of these things beyond the core news feed.
He did talk about, Sarah, different battlefields, as Rich mentioned, that we don't often discuss. He also, with respect to Apple, talked about how, Apple is storing iMessages on iPhones on servers in China. It was a very different tact and a very different tone from Mark Zuckerberg, much more direct than we've heard in prior years. What do you think the strategy is there?
I think he's trying to really paint a picture of how difficult it's going to be, but that he's excited about the future. He said that Facebook Stories and the whole Stories product across Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, it's actually going to be a bigger sharing format than the news feed over time. And I think that was one thing that helped investors get a sense of what the vision is there. Not just that revenue is going to slow in the short term, and that it's going to be tough to monetize those things, but that eventually more people will be using that. So I think he was trying to give a sense of how big these things could be, that Watch could eventually be as big as YouTube, that you should think of Messenger like iMessage. He was trying to give people a picture for how to think about the future of the company.
So, Rich, you've laid out a great argument for, why we should still believe in Facebook, but what about all the skepticism? What about all the mistakes they've made? What about some of the lackluster engagement with their core product, which is now the newsfeed?
Look, I would just echo Sarah's comment on, Instagram is a huge business. Huge. I mean, I look at Instagram and go, this is the modern day cure for boredom. Mark Cuban used to talk about TV being the cure for boredom. The cure for boredom in 2018 is Instagram. People are using it anywhere they go to kill a moment in time. Time spent has exploded. Usage is now up to 1 billion people. I mean, this is the dominant cure for boredom for people all around the world. It's going to grow from 1 billion to 2 billion users. Time spent is growing. It's basically becoming the mall where everybody finds goods and services that they're interested in. The targeting is incredible. I think as you look at that product, you can make a pretty, you could make a reasonable argument that over the next 5 years, maybe 7 years, but that Instagram will be a bigger business than core Facebook. And look, maybe they get Facebook stories to work. I don't know over what time frame. It may work better in other countries. But I believe that the growth potential of Instagram over the next 5 to 7 years, as they get things like stories monetization to really kick in. They've already got the users. It's the monetization that really has to kick in. As they figure out commerce and story monetization, let alone communication on that platform, Instagram seems like a beast that really is going to create tremendous value for Facebook shareholders. And so, yes, there's definitely been mistakes. There's definitely been challenges in terms of cleaning up the news feed and making it, a safer place. Look, it's the internet. There's lots of challenges with that. Google's had those challenges. Everyone's having those. Twitter, obviously. There's lots of companies having those challenges. But when you look at the long-term, meaning 3 to 5 year opportunities facing Facebook, I think there's a great growth story for investors, and I think that's why the stock is responding so positively today.
Sarah, big test coming up with the midterm elections. Facebook and WhatsApp didn't necessarily fare so well in the Brazilian elections. What are we expecting to see in the next week?
I think that Facebook is still working it out. I mean, they're every day finding new ways that the platform is being taken advantage of. They're reacting to reports in the media about certain pockets of their universe that are needing attention, and maybe accounts that need to be deleted. That's still happening. So, when we get to the midterms next week, they have their war room, their attention is on this, but it's still going to be a process of whack-a-mole as they try to figure this out. I mean, their system is still based on content that goes viral, content that gets shared, right? This is still the stuff that people are clicking on. This is still what makes Facebook money. And so it's going to be very difficult for them to really make a meaningful change. In the meantime, it's going to be very reactive.
Now, Rich, in the last few months, over the last year, we've seen the founders of WhatsApp, Instagram, Oculus leave the company. We've seen a broader protest from users about privacy, about how Facebook handles their data. And there seems to be this long-term question over whether users are going to buy that in the future, buy this idea that Facebook can rent their data and make money off it. Does that longer-term concern worry you?
Well, first of all, I want to correct 2 things that you said. One, Facebook doesn't sell data to third parties or rent it out to third parties. They use your data, obviously, to sell ads, but they don't sell that data to third parties, never have. I think that's been kind of an ongoing kind of talking point that it isn't factually true. Also, when we talk about users leaving over all of these issues, the data would show that Facebook users on a daily basis continue to grow on a sequential basis. And I'm not talking about moving from Facebook to Instagram, but actual Facebook users continue to grow. They've never gone down on a global basis, and even in the U.S., they were flat, and if not for a change in how they're accounting, they actually would have grown this quarter. And so I think there is this perception that people are fleeing Facebook, but they're actually not. It's not growing the way it used to, which is certainly a fair criticism, but the kind of the fall off where somehow this change in consumer behavior, I think, is a little bit misleading. I think the reality is, look, companies that get bought, entrepreneurs, there's a natural transition. I mean, I don't believe that Instagram would be what it is today if it hadn't been bought by Facebook, and Mark Zuckerberg's vision for what this could become. You know, Instagram stories would not have existed, in my view, if this company wasn't part of Facebook and Mark hadn't forced that to happen.
I just wanted to take a point about, you know, you say Facebook doesn't sell its data to advertisers. That's true, but what they sell is access to those people.
Sure.
They're selling that attention from those people, and so it really, I mean, that is where the data collection is coming from. And I think the company loves to have this debate of like, are they selling your data? Are they not? They love to say that we don't, but that doesn't take away the privacy concerns of Facebook having all this data, maybe more than users realize they have.
No, and that's totally fair. The only thing I'd respond to that is when you look at the internet, ad retargeting. I mean, click on any Google link and see how you're retargeted, or click on an Amazon product and see how you're retargeted. I mean, using data to target advertising is something that's been growing on the internet for years and years. And I would argue where it becomes a problem is when it's done poorly. When it's done well, I mean, I think if you look at the ads on Instagram, they increasingly feel like content where you actually want to buy the products and services. You want to buy the Allbirds, you want to buy the Rothy's. Like, you see things that you actually want to buy, and it's driving real businesses. I think where it's used inappropriately, or where they deliver bad ads, is where the consumer can get upset. So I worry more about the use of data for where it's used poorly. You know, when I go on Snapchat right now, I see a lot of ads. I mean, I see myself, I see hunting ads, and I see dating app ads. Like, I see ads that are completely targeted to the wrong person. That's where I feel like the use of, the lack of use of the data, where it's not becoming a good experience, is actually hurting the service. If the data makes the experience better, I actually think almost every consumer I've talked to would prefer that and likes that experience.
We'll see what users decide. BTIG research analyst Rich Greenfield, always great to have you here on the show, as well as Bloomberg Tech Sarah Frier. Thank you both. All right, still ahead later this hour, Mark Benioff will be joining us. Why he is in support of taxing some of Silicon Valley's biggest companies to raise money for the homeless, despite big opposition. This is Bloomberg. Earlier this month, the IRS unveiled proposed regulations for what Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said could be a $100 billion investment in distressed areas. The proposal, long awaited by investors, details how taxpayers can qualify for special breaks by investing in low-income areas. But a hidden clause could deter venture capitalists. The rule requires that businesses generate at least half their gross income within the zone they operate. And for startups, many of which seek widespread sales, this could pose a problem. Here to discuss, Bloomberg's Noah Buhire joining us now from Seattle. So Noah, walk us through why investors might be for or against this.
Yeah, so really, as you said in the intro, the Treasury is trying to walk a fine line here. They want good investment in these communities. They want investment that's going to help spur job creation, that's going to keep people from gaming the system. But what this one small clause in these regulations says is that a company has got to get most of its revenue or gross income actually from just a small area where the company is based. Some of these zones where you can get these tax breaks are rather small. In some cases, they're just a few square blocks. So, the problem is that a lot of high-growth businesses, especially ones that want to sell stuff over the internet or a service over the internet, are really going to struggle to meet that test.
So let's take a case of Steve Case, no pun intended, who is for this. Why?
Yeah, so Steve Case has been talking for several years about trying to get investment in areas that are outside of traditional tech hubs. He's seeded a bunch of companies outside Boston, New York, and Silicon Valley, and he's talked about this a lot. He was a big proponent of these tax incentives. But what he told me was basically that this gross income requirement was really going to be a challenge for starting the sorts of high-growth businesses that he'd like to see in these disadvantaged areas.
How final are the rules?
Well, yeah, that's an important thing to note. So these are proposed rules. The Treasury is taking feedback right now through almost the end of the year, and we'll see final rules hopefully at some point early next year.
So what does this mean for startups more specifically?
Yeah, so I think what it means is that these tax incentives were seen as something that could be especially useful if you were taking your winnings, say, from a pre-IPO company you were invested in pre-IPO and wanted to put them and do something more, like make more of an impact investment and try and fund a startup in an area that maybe hasn't seen startups recently. It's not to say that you can't do a startup in Newark, New Jersey, but if you were hoping to use these tax incentives to help drive that investment, it's really going to be much more of a challenge now.
So is Steve Case an outlier here? What are the majority of investors saying?
Well, I think the majority of investors are really just getting acquainted with these tax incentives. Steve Case obviously has been outspoken on them for a while, so he was aware of these regulations. But I did speak with a couple of other venture firms that are interested in this area and in these incentives, and they shared similar concerns.
All right, Noah Buhire for Bloomberg in Seattle. Thanks so much, Noah, for breaking that down. Speaking of tax policy, stay right here because Salesforce's Mark Benioff will be joining us ahead on his support of Prop C to support the homeless in San Francisco. Very controversial ballot measure. Plus, Waymo scores big in California with the first permit to begin driverless tests. What it means for Waymo's parent company Alphabet and the future of driverless tech in the United States. That's next. This is Bloomberg. It's a big win for Waymo in California. Alphabet's self-driving unit has been granted the first permit to test driverless cars on public roads. While 60 companies have permits to test autonomous cars in California, the state is allowing Waymo to be the first to field cars without a safety driver behind the wheel. This comes at an important time for automakers and self-driving tech companies. The Senate has a narrow window to pass an autonomous car measure, and House Democrats are thinking about next steps for the technology after the elections. For more now, we're joined by Bloomberg's Ryan Bean in Washington, and with me here in San Francisco, we've got Bloomberg's Eric Newcomer. So what's the significance of Waymo getting this permit first, Eric?
You know, Waymo has always insisted that they wanted to build the technology that didn't require the driver, so that they would be the first company to sort of get a permit to do that is fitting because that's always been their conviction. It's made them sort of go really slowly. They've been reluctant to have these pilot programs with a driver in the front seat. And so now we're going to see if their sort of theory of the world that you need a fully autonomous vehicle that can work without a driver is going to pay off.
I was actually one of the very first journalists to get in a Google self-driving car. That was in 2011.
Exactly.
And it's been years.
Right.
It's been years. So Ryan, talk to us about the importance of having federal legislation here.
Well, one thing that's important to understand right now is that there's nothing in federal law that actually prohibits a company from fielding a fully autonomous vehicle. Where the legislation that's being debated right now in the Senate is important is that it would allow companies to field a lot more cars that are exempt from federal safety standards that require things like a steering wheel, like foot pedals. So if Waymo is really going to go all of the way towards its vision of having a truly driverless car that doesn't need normal driver-focused elements of vehicle design and could deploy it at scale, they'll need these exemptions. And that's one of the big reasons that companies have been backing this legislation.
Eric, Sebastian Thrun, founder of the self-driving car, ran Google X for a long time. He's told me he's driven to Tahoe with his family, with his kid in the car, in the self-driving car, and yet there are still these questions. Are they safe? Can it be done? There are articles all the time about the mistakes that these cars are making. Talk to us about the challenges.
I mean, fundamentally, the problem with self-driving car is how do you know what you know you can't solve? You know, there are all these edge cases, as the tech people like to talk about.
Every day there are edge cases.
The problems that they know they can't solve yet, but they hope to solve soon. And I think the industry has been very bad at predicting just how long that would take. And now that those problems still continue to exist, it's hard for anyone to give assurances that sort of everything will be solved. So I think there is a lot of cynicism just waiting to sort of hammer out, what do you do if someone's waving a car on, but you have a fully autonomous vehicle?
Ryan, certain states have had, more issues than others. There have been accidents. There have been deaths with some of these experiments. You know, how does what we're seeing at the federal level differ from what the states are doing when it comes to legislating?
Well, I think you bring up a really important thing, and that is the accidents that we've seen earlier this year in Arizona involving Uber, in California involving Tesla, those 2 fatalities. Just recently in D.C., you're starting to see some signs that that's starting to have an impact, and it's starting to sort of affect the way federal regulators are viewing this technology. You're starting to see some signs that even the Trump administration is starting to look at this new technology with a little bit more skepticism. It's also emboldening and giving some ammunition to safety advocates who are basically saying that, look, there's this artificial rush to pass legislation at the federal level. It doesn't need to go this fast. We need to take our time.
So on that note, Eric, Bill Gurley, who was on the board of Uber for a very long time, has said, look, self-driving cars are going to take 20 or 30 years. And it was one of the things that he disagreed with Travis Kalanick, the former CEO, about. And Travis really wanted to forge ahead with self-driving technology. Dara Khosrowshahi has sort of continued that, but the strategy has changed.
Well, I think one of the most fascinating questions as Uber prepares for the IPO is going to be whether the company tries to set up a separate vehicle for self-driving cars so that, if you're a self-driving bull, you can invest in that. And if you're a self-driving bear, you can have exposure to Uber without sort of worrying about self-driving cars.
Because it's also incredibly costly.
It's super expensive. I'm sure when they file, we're going to see huge research and development costs that they're going to attribute to self-driving cars. So, Dara Khosrowshahi is going to have to sort of decide with his CFO, do we think we could be more valuable with this as part of the company or with this as sort of majority owned by the company with outside investors?
What has he signaled on this thus far? I mean, because he also seems fully behind these flying taxis.
We had on the we're not going to go down. But on the record, he said, they get sort of a lot of pitches from bankers. They're considering sort of a lot of different things. So I think he's shown sort of an openness to sort of maximize whatever makes the most financial sense for Uber, but he hasn't really shown his hand on whether they really would spin it out or get some sort of big outside investor or anything like that.
All right. Eric Newcomer, Bloomberg Tech, Ryan Bean, Bloomberg News. Thank you both. Coming up, could Apple's hardware overhaul be what it needs right before the holiday season? We'll talk about that and what to expect from fourth quarter results. That's next. And Bloomberg Tech live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology, and be sure to follow our global breaking news network TikTok on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. Yeah, I've actually never. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. On Tuesday, Apple unveiled a lineup of revamped iPads and MacBooks for the first time in years. Shares didn't really react to the announcement, but we should note the stock is up nearly 28% year to date. That's after Apple's market cap hit the $1 trillion mark. So can the iPhone maker continue this upward path, and what should we expect from its earnings report out Thursday? Here to discuss, we have Tim O'Shea, research analyst at Jefferies. He currently has a buy rating on Apple. Also with us, Bloomberg Tech's Mark Gurman, who covers the company for us as well. So Mark, walk us through the announcements and how you expect that to impact the holiday quarter.
Yeah, that's a good question. So what we saw is basically part two of Apple's new strategy for its results, right? They started this last year. They realized iPhone unit sales weren't really growing. So how do we keep growing as a company? Well, we raised the prices because we know people aren't going to buy fewer iPhones. We just know that we're not going to grow in terms of unit sales numbers. So what they did for their Macs was raise the prices significantly. So the new Mac Mini is $300 more than the previous model. The new MacBook Air is $200 more than the previous model. The iPad Pro is now $150 more than the previous model. So even if they stick around at equal unit sales to what they were getting before, their revenues are still going to rise. And we're going to see that play out tomorrow because Apple's expected to report between 18 and 20% year-over-year revenue growth. But we know iPhone unit sales growth is going to be stagnant from last year.
Now, Tim, we've got 2 quarters in play here. We're going to get the report for the current quarter. This is typically the slowest quarter before the big holiday quarter, but we will get that forecast for the holiday quarter. What are you expecting?
Well, look, we're expecting higher ASP. As Mark was saying, is going to be the story for earnings. I mean, we're going to be looking for 4 things tomorrow. It's going to be iPhone ASP, it's going to be China, it's going to be services, and then it's going to be guidance. In terms of ISP, Apple, as Mark has mentioned, has been raising prices significantly for the past 2 years. We think that those prices are still undermodeled by the street, and that seems like a source of upside for the quarter. China's a little bit of a different story. China's been on a tear, 20% revenue growth for the past 2 quarters. The question is, however, in the September quarter, with the dollar appreciating 5% against the RMB, and in a situation where you have these price increases, what does demand shape up? How does demand shape up in that type of environment? For services, that's the reason why we want to own this stock. We're looking for strong growth there. You could see some chippiness out of China in terms of mobile game revenue, and then guidance will be very important. We're actually conservative on iPhone units, but we're going to be looking for about $94 billion of revenue, about 1% higher than the street.
Mark, Tim Cook has come out swinging out at companies like Facebook and Google, criticizing them for their business model, how they're profiting off data that users share with those companies. Mark Zuckerberg hit back on the earnings call, talking about how iMessage is actually Facebook Messenger's biggest competitor right now, also playing up WhatsApp being encrypted, and that Apple stores iMessages in China of Chinese users on servers in China. What did you make of that?
Zuckerberg is absolutely right. I think one of the undertold stories about Apple is sort of how hypocritical it is, how they're storing their data in iCloud in China. They haven't been exactly clear about where that's being stored. There's been some indications that it's from state companies that are state-owned, perhaps companies that are not state-owned. It's just not entirely clear at this point. But he also raises a good point about iMessage and how sticky that is for Apple's hardware sales. Imagine if Apple, besides leading to people continuing to buy iPhones, used iMessage as a point of monetization. The most fascinating thing that I'm looking for in Apple's earnings results is services topping $10 billion for the first time in a quarter. And keep in mind how impressive that is, given Apple hasn't done anything new in services in a number of years. So imagine what happens when they start actually doing new things in the category.
Tim, does the threat of WhatsApp or Facebook sort of drawing a line in the sand between iMessage and its own messaging service, does that concern you?
Well, look, I think that services is the key reason why you own this stock. We're not concerned about WhatsApp. Well, what we think with services is you look at something like Apple Music, right? 3 years old, 50 million paid subscribers. You can compare that. You compare that to Spotify. It took them 12 years to hit 83 million subscribers. It underscores the power of distributing services inside of Apple's ecosystem, and we actually think that Apple Music is a subpar competitor in the category. So as Apple rolls out more services over time, as you get more user adoption, we think that services can ultimately, by fiscal 2022, account for 25% of revenue, 45% of gross profit. And the kicker is that these are internet and software services, right? And as the business mix shifts towards those businesses and away from the hardware business, we think that investors could be rewarded with higher multiple. And if that's the case, you're talking about a services business that could, by itself, be worth around $177 per share by fiscal 22.
All right. Well, we will, of course, be all over Apple earnings tomorrow. Jefferies research analyst Tim O'Shea, thanks so much, as well as our very own Mark Gurman. Thank you both. Coming up, Salesforce co-CEO Mark Benioff joins us talking about San Francisco's homeless problem and why he's supporting the controversial Prop C. That's next. This is Bloomberg. It's less than a week until the midterms, but here in San Francisco, there is another issue on the ballot. On November 6th, voters will decide whether to boost funding for homeless services through a special tax. It would apply to companies only with annual revenue of more than $50 million. Prop C would generate up to $300 million in additional tax revenue per year, earmarked specifically for tackling homelessness. But the proposal has split opinion among some of San Francisco's biggest tech names. Joining me now, a supporter of Prop C, Salesforce co-CEO Mark Benioff. Mark, great to have you back here.
Always great to be with you. Thanks for inviting me.
So look, you split with some of your tech peers. You split with the mayor of San Francisco on this issue. Why are you so out front on this?
Well, just walk right outside the door here and you know we have a very serious homeless crisis in San Francisco, and it is getting much, much worse. We have 7,500 homeless individuals currently on the streets. We have 1,200 homeless families, each with 2 kids. And how are we going to get them off the streets? It's getting worse. It's a problem. We know it. That's why I'm voting for Prop C.
What about the unfairness that other companies are citing here? You have Jack Dorsey saying, I admit that while I come at this as a citizen first, there's an unfairness I see in my role as CEO of Square. This doesn't apply to Twitter. Companies like Square and Stripe would be taxed at a significantly larger total contribution than much larger companies like Salesforce. Do you see the unfairness?
Well, what I see is a crisis of inequality in San Francisco. I mean, that is what is striking to me. We have 70 billionaires here in our city. That's incredible. We have companies that you report on with hundreds of billions of dollars of market cap. Of course, you know Salesforce, we're the largest employer here in San Francisco, not just largest tech employer, largest employer. We have a $100 billion market cap. And you just talked about a few companies, Square worth 30 billion, Twitter worth 20 billion, Stripe, you know, 20 billion. Well, the amazing thing is these companies can afford it. For us, it's just a $10 million tax. These are immaterial amounts to us. $10 million doesn't mean anything. You know, that's less than the private plane that Jack Dorsey is going to fly around on. You know that. And I'll tell you right now, it's the money that we need to make a difference here in San Francisco.
Well, Jack Dorsey is saying that at a certain point for Square, it becomes unsustainable and that they won't necessarily be able to stay in the city, which, in his words, would be heartbreaking. You know, what do you say to that?
Well, that's what I see with the homeless. I see that the homeless aren't, you know, getting the treatment they need, and that is they need shelter, they need mental health treatment, they need treatments for their addictions. And kids who are on the street, I mean, that's the most touching part. These kids, they've got to get into homes. And we have the plan. We know how to do it. We've been running very successful programs here in San Francisco for the homeless now for years. You know that. I've been involved with them. I've funded personally tens of millions of dollars for homeless programs. And what I found is that we know how to do it, but we need more funding now. I was just on the phone with the mayor. She needs an emergency funding of $6 million from me to get a shelter open in the Tenderloin. That's because she's out of money. And if you look at other politicos who are supporting this, well, Nancy Pelosi is supporting this. Senator Dianne Feinstein is supporting this. Jackie Speier is supporting this. And not just me, Chuck Robbins, who's the CEO of Cisco Systems, and Cisco Systems, we're also supporting it. So you have basically the region's, nation's 2 largest tech employers right here. It's a $250 billion of market cap between Salesforce and Cisco. We're both supporting Prop C. We think this is right for business because homelessness has been so tough on our business.
Mayor London Breed has made homelessness one of her big issues, and she is not supporting this. She thinks that there needs to be a regional, a more structured solution. Shouldn't she have a say in what happens in her city?
Well, of course, all of this got created way before London Breed became our mayor. And this is put together by our city's very top homeless advocates. In fact, the people who are on her staff and her team have been involved in putting it together. Our top homeless NGOs are putting it together. And really, even the experts at UCSF who have worked with other cities like Salt Lake City and our national vet programs that have gotten them off the streets have put it together. So I have a lot of confidence in the program, and I think this is the right thing for our city. And look, big business pays. Consumers don't pay on this. It's just our top 50 businesses, you know, in San Francisco that are going to have to pay a very small tax, but to deal with our #1 issue, and that's why I'm supporting Proposition C.
I know you've tried to raise money for this privately as well. You've tried to raise money for many issues privately. How much of this comes from your frustration that other tech leaders you feel aren't doing their part?
Well, thank you for opening that door. I mean, you know, we are constantly raising money here in San Francisco. You know that because you helped me out quite a bit. So thank you for everything that you are doing and everything that Mike Bloomberg is doing. Mike Bloomberg is probably one of the most generous people in the whole country. He's given over $6 billion of his fortune away. Incredible. Well, here in San Francisco, we have our own philanthropic needs. When we had our North Bay fires a year ago, we raised $40 million. The people who are complaining about this, they didn't give us money for that. Of course, we just raised $40 million to get every child off the streets in San Francisco, and we have now got hundreds of families off the streets in San Francisco with this program. They didn't give us any money for that. And of course, we had our SF Gives programs with Tipping Point, where we raised tens of millions of dollars to help those most in need in San Francisco. So the only thing that these guys are giving money to is the opposition to this proposition. That's the first time they've ever given any money to anything in San Francisco. Well, I guess it's good that they're giving.
The country can't seem to catch its breath ahead of the midterm elections. You've got the pipe bombs, the visceral debate on social media, shootings. You know, what do you think can be done? I mean, would you like to see Twitter go back to real names?
What I'd really like people to do is to just open their hearts and be able to look at when they're walking down the streets and you see homeless adults and children on the street, say, there through the grace of God go I. You know, one of the things that I love about San Francisco, we're built on the patron saint is St. Francis. And he had a great phrase. He said, in giving it is received, that we receive. And in giving that we receive, well, that's how I look at Proposition C. You know, the C in my mind is for compassion. The C is for charity. This is the very heart of what we do in the city. And I think if you want to really make the world better, then it's time to start giving. And that's the best way to let people know that we're caring about them.
You've taken a hard line on some other companies like Facebook, and in the past you've said that's caused you some troubles in your own friendships. And I wonder, has this done the same?
Well, of course, you know.
How are your relationships being affected by this?
Emily, well, hopefully our relationship is all right. But I mean, number one is, the most important thing is that I feel like I need to speak my truth, and sometimes that means speak truth to power. I've had a lot of tough phone calls from executives who get very unhappy when I say something like, you know, I said in January, Facebook is the new cigarettes. It's not good for you. It's addictive. It's being manipulated. Others are trying to get you to use it in ways you don't even understand. All of that has turned out to be true and much worse than even I ever imagined. And that's a tough conversation. And then this is a tough conversation, too, where I said, business is the greatest platform for change. We can fix the homeless situation in San Francisco right now. All we have to do is vote for Proposition C, and it's immaterial to our business right now, the financial numbers, but homelessness is material to my business. But that's a tough conversation for people don't want to give.
Tim Cook has also taken on Facebook and Google over their business model, over how they handle user data and privacy. Mark Zuckerberg hit back at that on the earnings call. Who's going to be on the right side of history in this privacy debate? And what do you make of this sort of bigger tech smackdown?
Tim Cook for sure is on the right side of history. He and I both have called for a national privacy law here in the United States. You know, we have GDPR in Europe. That's doing a fantastic job in Europe in protecting European citizens. They have more protection and control than any other region in the world. We need that here in the United States. A lot of the privacy debates that we're having right in our city, in San Francisco, well, we wouldn't be having that if we were in Paris or London or Munich. We need a national privacy law in the United States. We need that now. We need some of our great senators and some of our great congresspeople, and they know who they are, to really say, okay, we're going to write this law and get this done. We're trying to advocate for that. We've been doing that for months. That's going to help us to get through it, because right now our data is being misused in ways that we don't even understand, and all of that needs to come into the light. Look, companies need to really start to address their core values. What is the most important thing to Facebook? What is the most important thing to Salesforce? For us, we know it's trust. Nothing is more important than the trust we have with our key stakeholders. That includes our customers, our employees, our partners, and also our homeless. You know, the homeless are a key stakeholder of our business. What matters in San Francisco matters to me, and it matters to our employees. And you know what? Even when they're on their way home from work and they're in their BART station here, you know, it's becoming more difficult. That's why I'm voting for Proposition C. Now that you are a co-CEO, maybe you have a little bit more flexibility. Are we going to see you taking more freedom? More freedom. Are we going to see you taking on more of these issues more broadly? Well, I've been taking on issues like this. You know, how many issues have we talked about? I mean, that's just part of what I do, and it's part of what Salesforce does all over the world, which is we fight for the equality of every human being. It's part of our core values, and we so strongly believe that when one of our key stakeholders is impeded, by a law or by another organization or by a company, that we have to step in. And that's really why I'm supporting Proposition C, because I so strongly feel that our key stakeholders, our employees, customers, our partners. I mean, I was even on air with another journalist 2 days ago, and that journalist was assaulted in a Walgreens involving a homeless person while they were here for Dreamforce. Is that not something I should get involved in? You know it should be. You are at Dreamforce. I receive lots of emails, lots of phone calls from customers who come in from all over the world who said, hey, what's happening in your city? I've never seen anything like this. I'm sure you have your own stories, your own personal experiences. You have a lot of people come in from out of town to see you as well, and also to come on the show here. We're all hearing the same thing. San Francisco needs to make a change. We need it now. It's hit a tipping point. That's why I'm supporting Proposition C.
I want to ask you about a slightly different issue, which is Google under fire for how it handles sexual misconduct allegations for, as the New York Times reports, protecting high-profile men who've been accused of sexual misconduct, promoting them, giving them huge exit packages, and then some of the women who are involved get sidelined or pushed out of the company. Where did Google go wrong here?
Well, I really think every company better look squarely in the lens, and I've been saying this for a while, and this is going to be something you've heard from me now many times, gender equality. You know, when are we going to start really treating men and women equally in business? That is about equal advancement, equal opportunity, equal pay for women, and also preventing sexual harassment. And that is a tone that has to start at the top.
And you said you've actually fired some good people because of improper
improper course. I have zero
behavior.
tolerance because, look, you have to set the tone from the top. What do you care about? Equality is very important to us in our company. It's one of our core values. And as part of equality, you have gender equality. That is, you know, when we look at the women in our company, we're trying to give them all the support they can have to fully actualize themselves in the workforce. But when it comes to this issue, which is part of this, you have to have zero tolerance. And to see these huge settlements, it's extremely disappointing. I think it sets the wrong tone. And I can understand why employees are walking out of the business, because that's how they're doing it. By the way, they're not just walking out of Google. You saw executives walk out of Facebook. You see employees walking out and executives walking out of other companies. And I've said that on this show and others. I think you're going to see more of that. I even said that during my Dreamforce keynote, that employees and executives are more empowered than ever before to take action. Social media makes it possible. And on key issues like this and others, good for them. And I listen to those employees as well. I just set up an Office of Ethical and Humane Use at Salesforce. I think you know that, because I want to be able to have a conversation with our employees whenever they have a question on our ethical tone and tempo. Are we doing the right thing? We're not always going to do the right thing. We're going to have to adjust. Over 20 years of Salesforce, we've made a lot of adjustments. And my friends, who are CEOs, and you know, we just had a meeting of the top 100 CEOs in the country. This was a part of the discussion. I put it on the discussion. We had a panel on gender equality. This is really important.
Some would say that, you know, Salesforce is offering new ways to collect data on users, and that maybe it's a little bit hypocritical of you to be talking about privacy when this is something that a lot of companies do. Where do you draw the line?
Well, we draw the line right there, where we say the most important thing to us in our company is trust. Nothing is more important than the trust that we have with our employees, our customers, our partners, even our city, our community. And can I look at you straight in the eye and say, we're doing everything we can to have the most trusted relationships? And if there are things that come up with Salesforce, and there have been, and there will be in the future, and there have been in the past, then we have to address those things. But we're going to try to be a best practice, and we're always going to try to be on the right side of history.
All right. Salesforce co-CEO Mark Benioff.
Always great to be with you.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks for inviting me.
Good to have you on the show.
Thanks.
Always. All right. Mark Benioff mentioned Mike Bloomberg. We should note that Mike Bloomberg is the founder and majority owner of Bloomberg LP.
Yes, he is, and he's doing a great
Disclosure
job.
there. Coming up, Alphabet further entangles itself in sexual misconduct allegations, how employees are responding to yet another allegation next. This is Bloomberg. A top executive at Alphabet's experimental moonshot unit has left the company after the New York Times reported he was accused of sexual harassment. Rich Duvall was a director at X, the lab that came up with futuristic projects like internet projecting balloons and delivery drones. Bloomberg has learned that he left the company Tuesday without severance. Duvall's departure comes as Google grapples with a New York Times report that it gave some executives multi-million-dollar payouts despite allegations of sexual misconduct against them. Employees are planning a walkout Thursday to protest the company's handling of executive misconduct. And KKR has poured $145 million into Southeast Asia's top real estate app, PropertyGuru. The Series D financing will help PropertyGuru take full control of leading a Vietnamese real estate site and also help explore other businesses like mortgage financing. For KKR, PropertyGuru represents the latest in a series of deals in Southeast Asia. Its other investments in the region include Indonesian ride-hailing giant Gojek and Voyager Innovations, a digital payment service in the Philippines. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. You can tune in tomorrow for full coverage of Apple results out after the bell. I'm Emily Chang. This is Bloomberg.